You can have these huge workloads and people will just keep working and working and they won't have a break because they go, I'm just too busy, I can't have a break. But it actually is really good to go, I'm going to go for that walk on the beach, I'm going to go for a swim or a run, whatever it is that makes that person feel better. And then going back to work the next day, you're usually more productive because you've had that break. I think when people get really busy, it's hard to get out of that cycle of being busy.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. Delighted to be here and delighted that you're here. And I'm delighted to have my guest today, Rebecca McKaskell, who's the Chief People Officer at Invenco, so based out of New Zealand. So how are you today, Rebecca? It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. Great to be here.
Wow. So Chief People Officer, that's the, as high as you can go when it comes to HR. So congratulations on achieving that role. But I'd love to understand a little bit of your story. How did you come to doing the work that you do today?
Yeah. So I actually got into HR when I was overseas on my OE working in the UK. So I initially started sort of at the bottom as an administrator and progressed there. And I worked for an accounting firm for a few years in different HR positions. And then I came back to New Zealand and I initially actually worked in recruitment. So I did a lot of recruitment for large corporates, and then I moved into agency recruitment, which was really good because it gave me a really good understanding of, how to source difficult positions, the strategy around recruitment and negotiations as well. And then from there, my first position, which kind of, I suppose, was the stepping stone to get into this role, I got a role with eRoad, which was it's now a listed company, but it was a startup when I joined. And I joined when there was about 35 people in the company. And when I left, I think we had about 230. So I was there right from when we had 30 growing, and we grew internationally. So we grew in the US and grew in Australia as well. So that was a huge learning curve because it was setting up everything HR for a really fast growing technology company. It gave me a lot of insight into how you set up internationally and different employment laws that I hadn't been across, say for the US and Australia. So I was there for, I think, just over 5 years. I was with eRoad for a long time, but because we grew so quickly and so much happened, it was a huge learning curve. So that was really, really great experience. And then, so from eRoad, that gave me a really good stepping stone to then take the role at Invenco, and lots of similarities, fast growing technology company in New Zealand. We've got an office in the US, office in Malaysia. So I could take a lot of what I'd learned from eRoad and bring it to Invenco.
Well, wonderful. So it's so interesting hearing your story and how you've kind of moved up from recruitment, which gave you that strong foundation, and then working in a business which really kind of expanded. And I know at Invenco, you've done a lot of work around cultural change. And we were talking just before, I find that a really fascinating topic because often HR increasingly are given that role of, changing the culture, which is not an easy task. So I'd love you to describe what Invenco was like when you actually arrived, and what the culture was like, and what it's like now, and most importantly, what you did to bridge that gap.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose just starting off, I think when I was at eRoad, I was really fortunate because we grew the culture as we expanded, and so you could have a lot of control over the kind of culture that we wanted, and we made sure we recruited people that matched that culture. So we had a very strong culture when I was at eRoad. And when I came to Invenco, the first thoughts I had, I couldn't quite put my finger on the culture. People were really nice, very friendly, but it didn't seem to be a very consistent culture, or there might be different cultures in different teams or different pockets. And we had a new CEO that came on board after I'd been there for a year as well, and he was very keen to look at making a culture change. So I would say at the time it was quite hierarchical. There wasn't a huge amount of communication or a lot of collaboration going on. People were really friendly. Like, there's a great bunch of people, but it just wasn't quite working the culture, if that makes sense. So we made the decision, right, we want to have this culture change, but we need to figure out what kind of culture that we need to be successful as well. And so the first thing that I did was we did a survey to ask employees around, what kind of culture do they think that we need to be successful at Invenco? What sort of culture would help us thrive? And what kind of culture do you want to be? What kind of culture would you like for a business that you're working for? And I also asked questions about how would you describe the culture that we have at the moment? What things do we need to change? So there's a lot of employee feedback. We used a model, I think I talked about it before, which is a model from the HBR guide, which explains corporate culture in a way that's quite a technical way, so it's not too fluffy or sort of out there for people to get their heads around. And so we asked a series of questions and quite structured questions to get an understanding of how employees saw our culture at the time, and then the culture that they thought we needed. And then from there, once we had the survey results, it was quite clear that we needed to have a shift. And the main shift was there was that hierarchical function, and we wanted to make it more of a collaborative, results focused and learning, so very innovative. And so we worked out what was the shift that we needed to make, and then from that basically created a plan of how we're going to get to that culture. So, that was a couple of years ago, so it's been a long journey getting to the point where we are now, and included things like, changing our values, just a whole range of different things across the business.
So that's really, I'm sorry, I've got all this drilling in the background. So I'm going to just have to go with it. But changing culture is very, very hard. And when you describe the survey results, which said we are a very hierarchical culture, and then you got together internally to say what kind of business we want to be, an entrepreneur, innovative, more collaborative culture. So it's quite different.
Yeah.
And you kind of brushed over that, and we've changed it. It's been 2 years, but it sounds like, when you're changing behavior, you're going to the very core of the way we behave, the habits of an organization, the leadership style, the management style. So I'd love you to describe in a little bit more detail, like exactly how you got the leadership on board, how you got the management on board, because many of them may like a hierarchical way of working and not necessarily want to change in the way the business wanted to.
Yeah, there were a lot of steps actually to change the culture. So I actually did different surveys for the leadership team and employees to check. And thankfully, the leadership team, the results were very similar to the employee results about wanting to change. So that really helped. I think we've got, like the exec team, and then we've got the leadership team below. And I think we engaged a lot of people in that leadership level that perhaps would not normally have been engaged. And I think we also set very clear goals, specific goals for, say, the first 3 months and then the first 6 months. We didn't try, you can't try and do everything and change the culture all in one go. So it's just like, okay, what are the key things that we can change right now, like the low-hanging fruit? What are the things that we can change and identify that's, behavior or culture that we don't want to see, and then work towards the culture that we want. So some of those things were, we had feedback that we had performance reviews that were happening every 3 months. And people were saying, it happens every 3 months. We're so busy, we don't get a chance to think about the 3 months and what's happened. And then suddenly I have to do another performance review, and it's actually more draining for managers and employees. It wasn't actually helping people. And so we just shifted that to 6 months. So that was something really easy. We said, okay, that's fine. We can make that change now. And it demonstrated that we were listening to feedback that people had, and making a noticeable change. So that was one thing that, just some ways of working. We changed the values. So before we had 6 values that, I would describe as quite general values that any company could have, like accountable, honesty, things that you would expect employees to be anyway. So we changed our values so they connected to what the employee results were for the culture that they were looking for. So in our survey, it came through that people wanted to have a culture that was based on results, learning, and caring. So then we created 3 new values. So we had results became value winning, learning became innovative, and caring became collaborative. So we just had three simple values that people can recognize and everyone can kind of relate to. And then we had a description for each value. And so, that was rolled out, and then there was a lot of communication around why we changed the values and how we did it. I think we were quite lucky because people had an input in the values and the kind of culture. So we got a lot of buy-in, and I actually found that was actually relatively easy to change because employees felt like they had a chance to say.
That's great. I love those 3 values, easy to remember: winning, innovative, and collaborative.
Yeah.
And then the rollout. I'd love to understand how. So you've got everybody on side, and everyone was kind of integrated into the actual into the process. But changing the behavior, like this is what I'm very interested in now, because often when you do a values exercise, there's a lot of energy around it at the beginning, and then before long they get forgotten, and they become a documentation exercise. And people say, and often companies have like too many values, they have like 7 or something, and it's too many for people to actually remember. But how have you continued with those values to integrate it into behaviors? I'm interested to understand, is it integrated into the recruitment process? Is it integrated into training and so on?
Yeah, it's actually in everything. So we have the values up in lots of different places on our intranet, it's on, say, my email signature, just everywhere. So it's always kind of around. We changed it so our performance performance reviews that happen every 6 months. So we changed that. We added the 3 values in. So for example, can you provide an example over the last 6 months how you've been working collaboratively, and how would you rate yourself? And there's sort of like a rating there. And so people are always thinking about these 3 values and coming back to it. When we recruit, we quite often use advertising with our values and kind of link that with either the specific position or what they'll be doing. We've got all our values in the job description. So when people, new people join, they can see what the values are straight away. We do a lot around induction when people join around the values, and I actually go through a presentation and I'll talk through, hey, this is actually what we did a year ago. We had a survey, this is what people said, and this is, talk about the story and the reason why we have those values and how it links with our culture. And then I think people really got behind it, I think because the old values, they didn't feel connected. And so we have had a lot of support. People will, we have, for example, in our team's all Invenco channel, we've got a small channel that's called Small Wins and the Odd Big One. So that links with our winning value. So anything that's good that happens, or, something cool that your team has done, people will pop that in the Small Wins channel, and then so all the company can see, the good things that are happening across the business. So little things like that will link back to our values as well.
That's wonderful. And I think what's even more impressive, and I'd love to know the impact that it's had overall, and I'll ask you that in a moment, but I think what's more impressive is the last couple of years since you started that. Of course, we've had a global pandemic, and we've had to deal with, all kinds of disruption and home working and the rest of it. How did you manage with that? Like, you were changing, so you pretty much, when did you start this project? Was it 2020?
Started middle of 2019, so just over 2 years ago. Okay,
so before all the fun and games, and you started with obviously without the knowledge of what was actually going to happen. So how has the pandemic helped with the culture change? Because you have changed, and I know in New Zealand you've had, I lose track. Are you out of lockdown, in lockdown?
We're at a different level at the moment, but we're getting a lot more freedom. I think from tomorrow we can go to restaurants. Yeah.
That's cool. But you had a large amount of time where there was no lockdown where the rest of the world was under those restrictions.
Yeah, we have had, I mean, it is really difficult, and I think lots of people would find this with trying to maintain your culture and that connection when everyone is remote. A couple of things I think we had an advantage of at Invenco. We're a global company, so we were used to having video calls already. It was kind of part of our day-to-day that we would have video calls. So we already had that set up, and our technology was already ready to go. So everyone could already work from home. It was quite seamless when we went into, everyone was in lockdowns and everything was only over video. So that side of it was good. We made some little rules, like, for example, when you're on a Teams call, you have to have your video on, and we would say we don't mind if we see your kids or something, it's messy in the background, or for some reason you're in the kitchen or the bedroom, but we want to see people's faces just so we can have that connection as well. And I think one thing which a lot of people have said as well is you actually get to know each other's kids as well. Quite often my kids will walk in during the meeting or come and say hello to someone. So I think that's actually quite nice because it keeps things relatively down to earth. And we were still in the middle of a big culture change. And I think it was last year, so in the middle of all the lockdowns, I did a survey to check how we were tracking with our culture and the change of values. So we did a lot of that. So we still tried to get feedback and listen to employees when we were working remotely. And we also had department or head of department updates, and we did them sort of on a rolling basis around every 6 months. So, I would do an update. This is what we've been working on in the people team. These are, the vacancies. Here's some stats and, just some, funny kind of stories or stats about what's been happening in the people space. And we would do that to the whole company as a global update. And other departments would do that as well. So, for example, engineering or project management. And I think that kept the company connected as well, because it wasn't just one voice. I was very conscious that sometimes because of COVID, it's only HR that everyone's hearing from. And so it's really important to make sure that there's that communication and information coming from other leaders in the business as well.
That's great. Just on that, in terms of working with other people and collaboration, that's one of your values. So to get the change, and maybe now's a good point just to understand where you are in that change journey, because when you change the culture, there's a big shift, but then of course the job is never done. It's not like we've done that, now we can forget about it. So I'm keen to understand how you're maintaining that. And also I'm keen to understand who you collaborated with internally. Like one thing we're seeing a lot of is HR collaborating with marketing or communication, corporate communications, to really work together to make some culture changes. I'm curious to understand if that was your experience.
Yeah, we've got quite a small marketing team, just because even though we've been around for about 10 years, I still define Invenco as a big startup. Like, we've still got a lot happening in the US, but definitely work quite closely with marketing and to make sure that our communication, so externally and internally, is the same. So employment brand is really clear. And I want to make sure that, so for example, if someone joins and they see all the messages externally, that it's the same as when they join internally. I think with the shift and moving the culture, we did a lot when we recruited leaders or people in management positions or senior positions. There was a huge focus on, we're driving a culture change. What have you been involved with that? How do you lead? And so a huge emphasis on making sure we recruited the right people to help us with this culture change. And I did notice, I think I might have mentioned before, but I noticed when I'm recruiting or involved in senior hires now, I don't talk about the culture change. I just say, hey, we've actually got a really great culture. How would you help us maintain it? And I just realized the other day, I'm not actually asking those tricky questions about changing the culture anymore. So it's nearly like you don't know when you get there, but suddenly sort of when you're in the culture, it's like, all I'm hearing is that people love the culture, new joiners are really happy. we just had an external audit for our ISO 9001, I think is the exact, but we just had an external audit yesterday, and the external auditor said, hey, and he called this out and said, you're one of the most open and transparent companies I've worked with. You can really see that the culture is really collaborative, and he actually called out our culture, and I thought, okay, well, that's a really big tick that we've made it when people externally are noticing it. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And what numbers do you track, like in terms of being able to, so could you feel it clearly when you're there and other people feel it and sense it, which is great. And it feels like you've really thought it through in terms of the impact on different stakeholders and helping people adapt and to change. So huge congratulations. I'm curious to know what, like whether you have a dashboard or anything like that. Senior leaders love metrics and love tracking to see. So I'm curious to understand what numbers you actually track and and how you measure impact.
Yeah, we have a monthly dashboard, so I love a good dashboard as well. And we track turnover, so resignations. Obviously, it's a tricky environment at the moment, but we do track turnover and reasons why people are leaving as well. So we want to make sure that it's not reasons around, say, the manager, the leadership style, or the culture. So we look at the reasons why people are leaving. We have regular engagement surveys, where we do like one large engagement survey, but we have other surveys throughout the year, say around diversity and inclusion or wellness. And I'll ask the engagement questions in there as well, so we can keep tracking it throughout. We've introduced a employee net promoter score, so we can just get a rating from what employees say if they would refer a friend to work at Invenco. So it's just exactly sort of how NPS works. So that's tracking really high. I think the last score we had was 84%. And so for every survey, we're going to, from now on, always make sure we just do that. So it's quite a nice question. And if people are happy and they like their role and they think that it's a good company, then they will refer people, which is also a really good way to recruit as well. So that's quite an important one for us. And we've actually, our CEO is very approachable and really down to earth, so he'll ask people for feedback as well, or drop notes and just want to check what's happening too. So we have got that open feedback for people to message us or have a chat, but also I've got that structured surveys and reporting as well, so we've got that happening in the background.
That's wonderful. So it feels like you've really created a culture of well-being effectively in terms of moving from where you were to where you are. Are there any other initiatives that you do to support well-being? You know, what we talk about a lot, through all of our events and communications are around the importance of getting equilibrium or getting the balance right between the needs of the business and the needs of the employees. And clearly we've all got stuff going on, and then if you throw a pandemic into
I know.
Resilience becomes a very important skill set, and being able to cope with uncertainty and change, which even though nothing's certain, of course, I think that the realization has hit everybody over the last couple of years. So I'd love to understand what else you do to support employees' well-being, mental health on a day-to-day basis to help them, I guess, be their best self, so to speak, be in equilibrium so they can do great work. Yeah.
So we've got wellness committees with employee representatives in New Zealand, the US and Malaysia as a start. So we don't just talk about health and safety or hazards or anything like that. We always have something on the agenda, which is every time we meet around wellness and culture and employee well-being. So we're actually talking about it all the time and getting that feedback from employees in the wellness committee. When we're in the office, we try and have a lot of different wellness events. We have like a wellness week and have people come in and talk seminars. It's a lot easier when you're in the office and have, different, crazy shirt days or whatever it is, but just trying to bring people together. We have a lot of things like barbecue lunches or Friday drinks or, just things like that to make sure that it's a social side. When we've been remote in New Zealand, we at the beginning we were running Friday quizzes, so we would have a quiz and a bit of a joke for people that wanted to join, and have prizes, and that was a really good way of getting people together. The one thing I've been conscious of though, as lockdown continue or go longer, that people can get that Zoom fatigue, and so it's like, okay, well, do we want to actually minimize the amount of video calls they have to have and actually let people have a bit of a break as well? I think employee wellness is really connected with creating that culture as well, because you want to feel that you can come to work and, you know, and be your full self and not feel like you're having to hide anything, or you know, that you can't just be open about who you are or what's going on. You know, you've got stuff going on outside of work. And so I think creating the right culture and making sure that you've got a culture that embraces diversity and inclusivity really helps as well with employee wellbeing. And I think on that flexible, you know, working side, we are a technology company. Technology companies, anyone that's working in them knows they're really busy. There's a lot happening. I think the amount of work because it's tech, just, you know, it's really fast moving and a lot can happen. And I think you have to be really conscious that because of that, you know, you need to have those ebbs and flows, and you need to be able to have that break as well, because people can't keep going. So we're quite mindful about that and try and, you know, talk with managers as well to make sure people are getting a break. You know, I've got two boys, and so, you know, I'll, for example, leave at 2 o'clock to go and get the kids from school. And people know, and I'll go, hey, I've got to go get the kids. I'll be offline for a while, but I can catch up if I need to on that later on, or you know, give me a call when I'm in the car. So I think being open as leaders and people seeing that you've got that flexibility as well. And, you know, that for me, being a mum is really important. And so that school run, I like that part of my life and seeing how their day was. And so I think if you're a leader and you're demonstrating that to the employees and being open about it, it gives them a chance to do it as well, and have that, you know, and it might not be with their kids, but it might be that flexibility to go to the gym, or, you know, go for a walk and have a break from work, things like that.
So flexibility is so important, isn't it? It's like everybody, I think every wellness survey I've seen, that's always come, I think, top or very close to the top of the list. And it's interesting now that we've got that flexibility. I'd love you to, you know, given your role, and you've described like massive change that you've gone through, a fast-moving technology company with, you know, with a lot of people in different locations, and the flexibility that you like. What else do you do to help you find equilibrium every day? Because, you know, I'm very sensitive to HR, because particularly someone once said to me, like, HR people are great in a crisis, and which is true. You know, I know through my own corporate experience, like I was, you know, it worked very, very closely with HR in terms of lots of different change projects. I'm also very sensitive now with my different lens, is that if we've got to look after ourselves, so we can look after others, if you like, because like everyone's problem is your problem, and you know, particularly during so much change, and you know, it's all related to people, and ultimately every decision is related. It's going to impact someone, you know, whether it's a sales campaign or a new development or anything. There's a person somewhere as part of that process, and that all comes down to your responsibility as Chief People Officer. So what do you do to maintain your own well-being, to maintain, you know, to make sure that, you know, the best Rebecca is there every day? I'd love you to share your strategy.
Yeah, and I think, you know, everyone I know in HR, it's been crazy with COVID. It just, the amount of workload does increase. There's just, and everything is, you know, a new policy or something is you've got to navigate, and a huge number of questions as well. So the workload is definitely higher at the moment. I have a list of things that I will go to when I feel like there are the equilibrium, you know, there's not the balance that I need to have, like work is getting too big, and so I think that's really good if you've got a handy list, or you know what your go-to things are that are going to help you have that balance. I use meditation a lot, so I've used meditation probably I don't know, probably maybe the last 7 years. I just use, got different apps on my phone. I'm always, for people that haven't used meditation, I'm always saying, Headspace is a really good app to start, and then there's other ones that you can try. So that's my go-to first, and I'll know, things are getting a bit busy enough, and there's a lot of stuff going on that I'm trying to think about, and meditation is usually my go-to, and I know if I'm not doing it enough, because things will go get a bit too frantic. Just basic stuff, like I love going for a walk on the beach, so I I got a Samsung watch to try and get my steps up a bit more and actually notice it, but just going for a walk on the beach and having a breather. So I try and do that. I love anything to do with the beach, actually going for a swim. I've been learning to surf. I've actually been learning to surf probably for the last 3 years. I haven't quite got to being able to catch any big waves, but that, something like that, when you actually just have to totally switch off because you're out in the ocean and you need to really be thinking about exactly what you're doing. And then just spending time, with my kids as well. So they're kind of my go-to that I know will work. And, when it's frantic and there's been a lot going on with COVID, I'll just go back to the basics. And, I talk about that with my sisters. We'll go back to the basics, get your basics right. Enough sleep, enough exercise, enough healthy food, get all the basics right. And then everything normally sort of.
Such good advice. It's like the foundations, isn't it? If
it is,
foundations aren't in place, then you can see why the perfect storms can erupt if you don't have those basics cemented.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. You can have these huge workloads and people will just keep working and they won't have a break because they go, I'm just too busy, I can't have a break. But it actually is really good to go, I'm going to go for that walk on the beach, I'm going to go for a swim or a run, whatever it is that makes that person feel better. And then going back to work the next day, you're usually more productive because you've had that break. I think when people get really busy, it's hard to get out of that cycle of being busy.
It's true. It feels like you're never gonna be done. I've been there many times where it feels like you just have to keep working to get it done. And that kind of reminds me, I guess, of another big question that we often get asked is, whose responsibility is it for an employee's well-being? Is it the employee, our own, or is it the business? You talked about policies and setting people up for success and Zoom fatigue and some of those things, which becomes particularly different now because people are not in the office, so you can't necessarily see exactly how they're spending their time. And I don't know if with things like ergonomics and things like that were a big thing, whereas now I know certain like government departments are very big at that, and they're still continuing and maintaining that kind of support. But if you're asked that question, how would you answer that? Whose responsibility is it?
I'm really honest. I think it's both. I think you have to take responsibility for your own well-being. You're the only person that is really going to know what is going to help you feel better as well, and set boundaries. But it also goes back to the business and the culture. And I think a lot of people, you've worked in businesses where the culture hasn't been right, or the working hours are really busy. I've worked at a place where the norm was everyone was emailing and working during the weekend. And it got to the point that if you didn't reply to that email, then you were the person that wasn't working. If you're in the right kind of company, it's like, hey, you don't actually send emails over the weekend unless it's something urgent, and then you can contact the person. But weekends are for the people, people to recharge. So I think, if I'm honest, I would probably say 50-50. You need to have the right culture and create a space for people's well-being and demonstrate that it's important. And, there's a huge thing around well-being. I think it really does link with diversity and accepting people for who they are and understanding, everyone has a different background. But I think, you have to, as an individual, go, I'm going to take some responsibility for my own wellness as well.
I agree.
It's too tough.
No, it's so true. I mean, exactly as you described. It's being in tune with yourself, isn't it? So if you're out of balance, so that you can take corrective action.
Yeah, and I think employers, can help to provide the tools. So, when I'm talking to employees, I'll always say, hey, have you tried meditation? And lots of people laugh or go, no, I haven't. And I'm like, I know, you think it's only for hippies, but actually try it. It's really great. And, then like you'll talk to them a couple of months later and they're like, hey, I tried it and I actually quite liked it, but it's trying to get people out of their comfort zone. So that's where I see our, the HR departments, it's kind of a chance to go, here's some different tools that you might not have thought of. Here's some ideas, and then, create your own personal toolkit for your wellness plan.
Absolutely. And you've got things like surfing and meditation and, like all the things that you described. I like that way of thinking. It's a toolkit and you need to know when to use those tools. And it's very much personalized, isn't it? Because surfing is great. I'm trying to learn to surf myself, but, I'm not sure it's, it's more stressful than.
It definitely makes you focus. So I think that's what I like about it. That's
what I thought as well. It's like, you can't, you've got to be in the moment. You've really got to be that.
And I always think you never see any people that surf all the time that are really stressed. So I think that's
it's so true. It's so true. It's so true. Exactly. It's definitely a good de-stressor once you've mastered it. Any numbers that you can share with us on the impact of the cultural change, if it's not sensitive? I'd love to know. You've done all this work and clearly it sounds really good. It sounds that it's worked, and you do your dashboards. Anything that you can share with us as to the impact it's had on the business, so that, because to one of your earlier points, culture is often seen as a fluffy, nice to do thing. It's a lot of work changing it, but it's often seen as not hard business, not the kind of core things that we should really be investing our time in. But what you've done is done that hard work, and during a period of extraordinary change, on a global scale. So I'd love to understand the impact that it's had.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of numbers. So 2019, in a survey, we asked about do you know what our company values are? And that was when we had the older values. I think it was about 6 of them. And we had 59% say that they did. So that was 41% of the company couldn't remember what all the values were. And then this year, 2021, asked the same question again. It was actually, we did a survey just to check how, have we implemented this new culture and where our values are sitting. And we got an 84%, which I thought pretty awesome. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. So 84% said that they knew what our values were. I mentioned the ENPS, so that's sitting at 84%. So 84% people would be happy to suggest Invenco as a workplace to one of their friends.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that's really positive. And then our engagement score. So we did an engagement survey. This is just a standard overall engagement. We use Culture Amp, which actually has about 5 questions that roll into the engagement score. So it's based on a number of different questions. September 2020, we had 69% for engagement. So not too bad. It was still, quite solid, still room for improvement. This March, we had 71%. So I'll probably do another survey February, March next year. So I'm hoping, obviously I would like to see a shift there. And and I think that it's a good way. It's not, it's not just always the engagement score we're looking at as well. We're looking at, people giving their direct line managers positive scores and how the overall scores are with the culture as well.
Wow, amazing. Well, let's leave it there, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I'd love to acknowledge you for the amazing work that you've done and continue to do. Where can people find out more about you and connect and about Invenco if they want to connect with the company or with you personally?
Yeah, no, I love talking about culture and anything like this. So happy to speak to anyone if they want to find out more. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know if that will come up here, but I'm on LinkedIn, or can probably contact me from the Invenco website. There's my name and just my name at invenco.com.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for sparing some time for us with us today. I really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lawrence.